country with the largest population in the world now has a communist government. Photographer Hu Bo is on the platform.
The square was full of excited people chanting, "Long live Chairman Mao." But there was really only one thing on my mind, and that was to capture those precious moments with my camera and leave them to future generations. It was a special day for China. After thousands of years of struggle, we were liberated at last. What a joy.
The crowds in Tiananmen Square hear Mao Zedong proclaim a new start. Mao says China will now be free of inequality, poverty, and foreign domination. From now on, 1/5 of the world's people will become part of the greatest experiment in mass mobilization ever attempted. They will be told to work, live, and think in a new way. As they attempt the leap to Mao's vision of a new society, millions will suffer or die, but their lives will be transformed. For the first half of the 20th century, most Chinese still lived in a way that hadn't altered for generations. 4 out of 5 worked on the land in desperate poverty. Most were in debt to landowners or moneylenders. In the west of China, Hu Benchu's family were landless laborers.
It was a hard life. We had very little to live on. I wove cloth day and night to make ends meet. We could only just scrape by. In the past, there was justice for the rich, but none for the poor. Who cared about us then? Nobody. You can't believe how badly the poor were treated.
The need to ease the rural poverty and modernize was increasingly recognized in the 1920s. President Chiang Kai-shek re-established a central government, ending the turmoil between rival warlords. His Nationalist Party drew support from Chinese businessmen and the landowners in the countryside. Foreigners were allowed to keep their privileged hold over trade and finance. And the nationalists believed that in time, capitalism would spread its wealth out to the other China, beyond Shanghai and the coastal cities.
Nighttime in dear old Shanghai, then I'm dancing, sweetheart, with you.
But the gulf between the lives of the middle class and the mass of peasants and laborers remained as wide as ever. As China began to industrialize, low wages and poor conditions increased the social divide. Some looked to China's Communist Party for a radical change that could take China out of its lethargy and end its exploitation by foreigners. Starting in Shanghai, the communists attempted to stir up the city's factory workers. The communists were savagely suppressed by Chiang Kai-shek's forces from the late 1920s. Those who weren't purged were driven out of the cities and pursued across China. After the historic Long March, they reached the remote northwest. From the caves of Yan'an, their leader, Mao Zedong, planned a new kind of revolution that would spring from the countryside more than the workers in the city. In a short time, he said, several 100 million peasants will rise like a tornado or a tempest. The communists and nationalists had cooperated, albeit uneasily, during Japan's invasion of China. But when the Second World War ended, a full-scale civil war between the two sides resumed. Mao promised the peasants land reform, and his troops treated them well. By the autumn of 1949, the communists had driven the nationalists out of all the major cities. They fled to the island of Taiwan, taking the country's gold reserves with them. And Mao Zedong took over a bankrupt and devastated country. Mao now held more power than any leader since the emperors. He promised a China that could stand on its own feet alongside the other world powers. Mao's thought and the mass line were to be the foundation for a purer, fairer, more progressive Marxist state than the one that had emerged in the Soviet Union. It was to be a revolution in which the peasants were to take the leading role. Activists would explain the ideas of class identity and class struggle to every village and workplace, and incite the peasants to speak up against the enemy. Chinese were now bombarded with propaganda. Traveling projection teams took films to the remotest areas, bringing the message of active socialism. As the revolutionary program started, the peasants were the first to benefit. They were granted the land reform they'd wanted for so long. It was the party's plan that they should seem to make the change themselves. In a pattern that would be repeated again and again, speak bitterness meetings were staged. Ritual dramas in which the landlords and others linked to the defeated nationalists were confronted.
We were told to get together and ask the landlords to return land to us. We stated how much they should return and how they should return it. There was a denunciation meeting every day.
Local party secretary Luo Shifa helped whip up feeling in his village.
The first thing we had to do was to bring down the landlords. What we did was to persuade the tenant farmers to denounce them. At the public meeting, they would explain how they couldn't afford to pay back the rent every year, or how they had to take out high-interest loans to pay it off. People around the stage sympathized with the poor peasants' stories, and they'd weep.
政府接受了群众的要求，判决罪犯李志仁的死刑。坚决与人民为敌的反革命分子一定受到人民严厉的制裁。
Hundreds of thousands were killed. The class warfare was less vicious in the cities. The communists tried to win the support of the managers and technicians the revolution needed to keep the mills and plants running, and to assimilate the capitalist owners who had not left with the nationalists. Propaganda showed businessmen handing the deeds of their companies over to the state, and then celebrating with improbable glee the new socialist dawn. Zhong Guodong, district party secretary, heard what was really happening.
By day, they pretended to support the party. But at night, behind closed doors, They gathered their families round them and cried, bemoaning the fact that everything they'd worked for would soon be lost.
经营这个事业啊，几十年呢，看起来我们这个事业长不了了。这些情况呢，
When we realized this, we decided to recruit capitalists who sympathized with the party.
工商业资本家的骨干分子。
The Jin family in Shanghai decided it was best to cooperate. Mrs. Jin took part in a film explaining her new outlook to other wives.
金锦之在小组会上说，过去丈夫不能掌握自己的命运，做妻子的命运更是没有保障。大家走上社会主义的光明大道，就可以放心了。
After liberation, the communists didn't like businesses like my husband's, so he was in trouble. Then we studied the party's policies and decided that joint ownership with the state was the only solution.
But for those who resisted, the changeover could be bloody. Qi Yo-yi worked at a Beijing factory.
The big bosses in our factory were executed immediately. The less important ones were forced to reform through hard labor. We were asked to keep an eye on them. We hated them so much, we beat them if they didn't work hard enough. That's the way they treated us. In the past, they'd been the masters. Now we were.
Women were given new rights at work and in marriage. The painful tradition of foot binding was abolished. And women were helped in the drive to end illiteracy. Gao Yuying from a village near Beijing was first a pupil and then a teacher.
Once I'd learned how, I could teach others to read. I didn't have a blackboard, so I used a wooden door. I wrote words on it and they copied them. Some of them had their babies with them, breastfeeding and studying at the same time. I can tell you it was really hard.
创造出了许多好办法。这种每人一块小黑板的学习方法，当他们去地里干活的时候，就把自己的小黑板插在地头上，结合生产劳动来熟读生字，真正做到了学以致用。
To clean up China's dirt and disease, the communists launched mass campaigns and expected everyone to take part. Propaganda films were used to set the pace. Millions were inoculated against the epidemic diseases that had racked China. War was waged on old habits. The pressure was inescapable. Party activists checked up on their neighbors' housework. Shen Fuqin from the local street committee went from house to house.
We used to say, "Do you love your country? The country is calling on you to carry out the public health campaign. Get on with it." When they heard this, people said, "Oh, if we don't do it well, that means we don't love our country." We used to go up the lane to check on people's housework, to see if they'd done it properly. We'd examine the tables to see if they were dusty. If everything was neat and tidy, that'd be fine. If not, I'd tell the woman to do better.
张大姐，你这个卫生啊，大面上搞得差不多了，那个犄旮旯的还缺把劲儿。
We cleaned the alley and put up posters. One said everyone must help to exterminate the 4 pests.
Nothing escaped attention. One of the 4 official pests was the sparrow. The small birds were accused of devouring the crops.
The word came down from above to mobilize the people to kill the sparrows. Villagers of all ages joined in. We were so busy we even had to take it in turns to eat. The trees were really high and hard to shake. But everyone did their best, so the sparrows couldn't land. We used catapults. Some people used guns. Whoever killed the most sparrows was praised and given rewards. Those who caught fewer were criticized and encouraged to do better the next day.
In fact, the campaign rebounded. With the sparrows gone, more insects survived to strip the crops. The same effort to get mass participation was applied to another type of cleansing, of incorrect thoughts. People were asked to look out for neighbors or fellow workers who seemed to meet the party's description of rightists or capitalist roaders or counter-revolutionaries, and who were denounced. But the boldest attempt to harness the energy and enthusiasm of the people came in 1958. To speed up progress, Mao wanted to use the force he believed in most, China's sheer numbers, for his great leap forward. Propaganda cartoons showed how the Chinese were meant to overtake Western industry and food production. Peasants, already reorganized into cooperatives, were herded into huge communes. In his area, District Secretary Zhong Guodong took on another challenge.
I was responsible for setting up people's communes and turned 8 agricultural cooperatives into 2 big communes. There were over 100,000 people in each one. Big communes could handle big projects. With thousands of people to do a job, things were completed in no time.
Production brigades were directed to where they were thought to be needed most, under militia-like discipline. The party said it was a more efficient, better, faster way to build socialism. Private land had already gone. Now family life was to be destroyed as well. Peasants were to eat food cooked in central kitchens. Children would be looked after together. Mao set the target of doubling food production in 1 year. Revolutionary enthusiasm, he said, will triumph over all obstacles. He took a close interest as the peasants competed to increase yields. When the Dongshun commune promised a record harvest, it was Zhong Guodong, the district secretary, who showed the chairman round.
Chairman Mao himself visited the show field and asked how much it was expected to yield. My colleague said 50,000 pounds an acre. Chairman Mao replied to him, even if you could achieve 10% of that, it would be a miracle.
The party encouraged the rivalry. In the past, wheat yields had been £500 an acre.
会上，各乡各社的英雄们用喝干大海、斩断高山的气概，摆开了争夺水稻冠军的擂台。三关乡的好汉们首先扯起了水稻亩产3000斤，紧跟着下岗乡的好汉涌上擂台，大声喝道：“保证水稻亩产4000斤，秋后丰收上北京。”北郭乡的英雄们哪能落后？三关错失加了马，我们错失赛火箭，我们亩产5000斤。全县各乡打擂台的英雄和干部们一起宣誓，争取水稻超过10000斤。
In fact, the records were bogus. Communes falsified their figures.
就把那个生产的好稻子拔到那儿堆到那儿去。
We removed all the ready planted rice from the fields and replanted it in a show field so that we could reach our quota.
是搞不好的，一股通风不透光。
Planting it so densely with no light or wind blowing through meant it would rot.
搞了时间不长就都烂了。
Before long, the rice did rot, and the peasants got angry. They said, if you take all the rice and waste it, what will we eat in the autumn? The peasants didn't want to go on with this cheating. I tried to get it stopped, but the municipal boss ordered us to carry on.
But the false statistics contributed to a dangerous delusion that China had plenty of food and could concentrate on other things. We must reach for the moon and the stars, said Mao. Man can achieve anything he can imagine. Great construction projects also pulled mass numbers against apparently insuperable obstacles. Lin County in Henan was an arid plain blocked off by mountains. The 3,000 kilometers long Red Flag Canal was planned to bring in water over the rocky terrain. The canal workers were celebrated as revolutionary heroes. Accidents were frequent. Zhen Yangchung was sent to clear up afterwards.
When you were at the foot of the mountain and looked up, you could see bits of flesh glinting in the sun. I climbed down the rope. I picked up some dirt to wipe away every trace of the bodies. Otherwise, people would have been too frightened to carry on.
But the canal took twice as many people and far longer to build than expected.
Initially, there were 30,000 on the project. The plan was that if each person built 1 meter, the canal would be completed in 1 or 2 months. But it was all much more difficult because the canal was halfway up a mountain. In the end, it took 10 years to complete.
In the Great Leap Forward's most ambitious goal, Chinese were told production of steel also had to double in 1 year. And instead of producing this just from heavy industry, the energy and goodwill of the peasants was to be mobilized again. Small furnaces were built in villages and backyards across the country. They collected any scrap they could find. Next, they melted down doorknobs, wash basins, tools. As the fever grew, people even gave up their cooking woks. Forests were decimated to fuel the furnaces 24 hours a day. over China, almost everyone, even hospital doctors, neglected their normal jobs to answer the call. But even those taking part began to see it was folly.
All we did was make steel and nothing else. We didn't produce anything useful. How could we? We dug holes in the ground and tried to produce steel. It was all such a waste of time.
Slowly it became clear that after so much effort and time, after so much wood had been burnt and so many pots consigned to the flames, the steel produced was impure, weak, and useless. The full effect of the disastrous experiment began to be seen in 1959. While the peasants had been making steel, they had done little else. Crops had rotted in the fields. Seed hadn't been planted. Food was already short. Because of the falsely exaggerated harvest, the government had taken a bigger share of the crops to send to the cities. A drought made the problem worse. In 1960, the scarcity turned into a major famine. National food production fell over a quarter. Local secretary Luo Shifa had been away from his village studying at a party school.
When I came back from Beijing, I saw that many people had bloated stomachs from starvation. We had 1,600 starving people in our commune. Some were falling over with weakness and just lying in the road. Others died. When the peasants saw me, they began to cry. I cried too. They said to me, if I got there any later, they might all have been dead.
In a secret report, the party later admitted the full extent of the calamity. Their own figures showed that over 20 million had died from the famine. It was almost certainly more. The new graves in the burial grounds confirmed that the Great Leap had failed. Revolutionary enthusiasm hadn't been enough. In the aftermath, Mao kept to the side and let the president Liu Shaoqi run the country. Even Mao knew that the economy had to be protected from his revolutionary zeal for the time being. So more cautious targets were set. Large communes were abandoned. Chinese peasants were allowed some land again and could sell their produce in free markets. They were allowed to live as families and return to something near normal life. There were fewer slogans. But Mao was biding his time. He worried his revolution was going off the boil. He saw a privileged bureaucratic class emerging, as had happened in the Soviet Union. He feared the return of capitalism and materialist incentives. He believed China's chance to have a perfect socialist society was passing. Mao's supporters printed a book of quotations from his political speeches and writing and used them as the basis for a new attack on what was called the capitalist road. We still have to wage a protracted struggle against bourgeois and petty bourgeois ideology, said Mao. As he tried to regain power, Mao used a piece of spectacular political showmanship to revive his reputation. To demonstrate his continuing vigor, at the age of 72, he led a mass swim across the river Yangtze. Trying to break the thinking and attitudes of old China, he began with her traditional culture. The 1,000-year-old Beijing Opera was singled out as the start of his attack. If it could be changed, then anything could be. 8 new revolutionary plays were written to replace all the old stories of emperors and concubines. Zhong Xiangling, who once played princes, now took the lead as an officer in the People's Army.
我能拿到了这个角色，由我来演。
I was chosen to play this revolutionary role, and it was a great honor.
很光荣。 我们是灵魂的工程师，我们有一种。
As artists, we were engineers of human souls. We didn't just perform to earn money, but had a serious responsibility to re-educate people. We were so happy that Chairman Mao was creatively involved in this opera.
By late 1966, the great proletarian cultural revolution was well underway. The group behind it, led by Mao's wife, and later to be called the Gang of Four, tried to build the Mao cult to new heights. In school, children recited his message to them. In Shanghai, at the No. 6 girls' school, Xiao Ailing was the headmistress.
我们同学就感到外滩的变化、上海的变化。
The pupils came to realize that all the changes taking place in their families, at school, in Shanghai and China were brought about by Chairman Mao.
毛泽东带给我们的。
Students were used to carry the Cultural Revolution forward. For the first time, young people were encouraged to attack authority and the old hierarchy of the party. And the advice came from Mao himself. Bombard the headquarters, he said. To rebel is justified. One of the Beijing students who were the first to call themselves Red Guards was Zhang Baoqing.
Chairman Mao started the Cultural Revolution to keep up the momentum for change. Everything he said was right. We thought if we follow Mao, we can't go wrong. Only he can lead us from one victory to another.
A succession of huge rallies were held in Tiananmen Square. The master of mass mobilization had shown he could still draw a political response directly from the people. This time it wasn't the peasants in the country who did his bidding. The most educated and energetic generation in China were following his every word. The students felt excited and liberated as never before. an estimated 11 million Red Guards came to see Mao. The rising fervor was directed at Mao's rivals, including President Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping. Banners attacked Liu. Even small children were taught to denounce Liu. The rage was extended to foreign governments, with attacks on Western diplomats in Beijing. Almost anyone who was in power of any kind was denounced as a capitalist rhoder. The whole structure of the party was brought down, including Zhong Guodong, the district secretary in Tianjin.
In all the
previous campaigns, I'd been singling people out and telling them their mistakes. I was the one who found fault with them. I didn't expect the tables to be turned on me this time round. Some of the biggest high school students who were very loyal to Chairman Mao pressed my head down, twisted both my hands behind my back, and made me bend over throughout the denunciation meeting. I didn't think I'd survive.
In Sichuan, Luo Shifa, the party secretary who'd helped his village through the famine, was denounced.
I didn't expect the Cultural Revolution would affect me. Why should it? I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, and always had the support of the people. At the denunciation meeting, they slapped my face and forced me to kneel down. Kneeling on hot charcoal and broken glass was almost a daily routine. So what I did was to put a soft pad inside my trousers, and that made it easier when I was forced to my knees.
In schools, pupils attacked their teachers. In Shanghai, the teacher who had taught her class to love Mao was now accused of being disloyal.
There were several hundred Red Guards wearing armbands. Others had military belts. Some had scissors in their hands ready to cut people's hair. They chopped off my hair and beat me with sticks. They ordered me to produce the Red Book and to recite that revolution means rebellion and violence. That day I was wearing a white shirt without pockets, so I wasn't carrying the Red Book with me. They said, if you're not carrying the Red Book, that means you aren't loyal to Chairman Mao. How dare you say you love Chairman Mao? You deserve to be overthrown. It was December in Shanghai and very cold. They ordered me to stand outside in the playground from morning till night. But then they thought the punishment wasn't severe enough. So they got a big blackboard and pressed it down on me. One of them stood on the right side, and one on the left, like a seesaw, and I was squashed in the middle. They wanted to knock me down and keep me down forever.
Xiao Ailing was left with permanent injuries to her face. Up to 1 million were killed or driven to suicide. The country was now in the grip of a revolutionary mania that became more and more violent and destructive. The Red Guards attacked the Four Olds: old habits, old ideas, old customs, old culture. Books were burnt and museums pillaged. The anarchy spread. Schools and hospitals closed. Offices and factories were in chaos.
The factory almost came to a standstill. Production was impossible. We had meetings every day and workers were denounced. We didn't know what to do. One day you'd be arrested, and the next day it would be my turn. We didn't know what would happen to the country.
The attempt at a state of continuous revolution was impossible to keep up. People craved the return of a more normal, stable life. After 2 years, the army had to be called in to end the factional fighting, restore order, and help to re-establish the party's authority. And the Red Guards were sent to the countryside to cool off and learn from the peasants. But the Cultural Revolution only ended with Mao himself in 1976. In a bid to keep the country together, the propagandists exploited the scenes of mass emotion on Mao's death. Much of the grief was genuine, and many had seen their lives improve beyond measure. But many millions had suffered or died as victims of Mao's rhetoric. All his charisma hadn't delivered the new society he'd promised. After Mao's death, his closest associates, the Gang of Four, were arrested and charged with throwing the country into chaos. His most cherished ideas were abandoned. His successor, Deng Xiaoping, tried to replace ideology with economics. The Chinese were to be mobilized not by dreams of equality, but by money. In the 1980s, political control was as tight as ever. But the slogan from the top was, "To get rich is glorious." One legacy of Mao's reliance on popular action remained. During the Cultural Revolution, he'd allowed the students to challenge authority and feel a new sense of liberation. After Mao, the state always knew that the people, once they'd learned how, might try to challenge the party's authority again. And their fears were to be borne out on Tiananmen Square in 1989.
Tot 1 uur vannacht trekt Discovery de wereld rond met 4 specials van Lonely Planet. Over de mooiste tochten, de witste stranden, de beste festivals en zo direct de meest exotische gerechten.